This is the final presentation for Books R Us, which presents books to users rated on emotions readers felt while reading that book. What the team will discuss is just an overview how our requirements and designs have changed over the course of the semester. We'll demo the app and we'll revisit our test plan and maybe go over some architecture and structure and basically the things that have changed since the last presentation. For the product overview, nothing's changed in terms of our core goal, which is to recommend books to users based on the emotions that they may experience while reading that book. We kept the same 6 emotions, but the number of features that we completed have changed. Some things that got added were the voting. We can actually vote on those books now. We expanded our library using a Google Books API. We have 50 right now, but with a click of a few buttons, we could get thousands and thousands of books, but we felt that was a little more than we needed for this test of our app and if it's valuable. We can do dynamic searching of all those books that we have. So if you go to our voting page, you can type in book titles and book authors, and it will dynamically filter that page to what you need. And we do also all the top books for an emotion, as well as all the books rated on a single emotion. That's a new one. So if you click on fear, it'll show you all books that are rated from 1 to N on fear. Some things that we never got to, and so we just decided to nix them. They were too big for this class. We're making user profiles, and along with user profiles came individualized recommendations and also having a personal library of things you may want to read in the future and leaving book reviews and things like that. Those were all out of scope of what we were up to. The requirements did not change too much. Our design actually stayed pretty similar to what we started with, but our designer will show you some of those things in his portion. The components that did change, though, was the front end. Well, we revamped our entire architecture to .NET Core. Our front end stayed Angular, but it was no longer presented with a MVC, for the .NET MVC. It is still the generalized sense of an MVC, a model view controller, and that view is presented in Angular. The backend totally changed, where our controllers are the .NET Core, and our database connection is Entity Framework, which made things a lot quicker to implement with almost single line calls to the database instead of making huge data transfer objects and things like that, or data access objects. And our API went from Goodreads to Google Books. And that was because Goodreads does not present any option to get just an entire list of books. It's only like search a book, retrieve a book by its title or something. And we didn't know any titles. We just wanted to get all the books, and Google Books allowed that. A flow of how you would come through our app is you'd get to the homepage, you'd see all the books, all the top books per emotion, and there's 2 places you can go from that homepage. One is a ratings page for a single emotion, and you see the books rated from 1 to N for that emotion. You can come back by clicking the home button. You go to the voting library where you see all the books to vote on. You can come back by clicking the home button. But if you're still in the library, if you click on any book, it'll take you to a voting page specific to that book. And our UML got much more complicated as we went on, which is a good thing. That showed we were making some progress. One of the most important relationships is that emotion score that takes an emotion and a book and joins those 2 things together and represents when those 2 things interact. And it was very crucial to all of our ratings and for us to receive votes and implement them in some way, and also to output recommendations based on the emotion scores of all these books compared to each other.
Welcome to the final demo of Books R Us. In this demo, I'll be taking you through the 4 major pages a user can go to: the recommendations page, voting page, library page, and ratings page. The first page that a user will go to is the recommendations page, which shows the top rated book for each emotion. So for example, for Disgust, it shows The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, and it shows a book cover, title, and author. When viewing this page, the top 6 emotions will get randomly put in order. So for example, if I refresh the page, it will rearrange the book order, but still show the top rated book for each emotion. And the first page a user can go to from here is the View Library page by hitting the View Library button. And from here we can see a very similar structure with each book showing the cover, title, and author, and then a vote button below that to vote on that specific book. On this page, a user can view any book in our database by scrolling down. However, there's also a search bar up top, which will dynamically search for the book by title or author. So for example, if I wanted to look up The Road by Cormac McCarthy, I just type in The Road. I can even just start typing in any part of the book. And then by resetting that, it will show all of the books. And if I also wanted to look up an author, say John Green, I can start typing in John, and then it will show John Green and John Andreas Olson. And then in order to vote on a book, I would just click on the vote button. So for example, I can go to Lament for a Nation and hit vote. And then here it shows what book I'm voting for and then the 6 emotions I can vote on. So for example, if I wanted to vote on Disgust for Lament for a Nation, I'd hit Disgust, hit submit, and it would take me back to the vote library page. However, say I was at American Psycho and voting for that, and as a user I decided I didn't want to vote on this book. I wanted to go back to the library. I would just hit vote library and it would take me back to that page. And that's the general workflow for selecting a book and then voting on a book and what emotions best represent it. And then from here, I can go back home to go to the last page, the ratings page. So on this page, it shows the top rated book for each emotion. But if I wanted to see all of the books ordered for that emotion, I could click on the anger section, so anger, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then type on that, and then it will show me the top rated books for that emotion in order, and then also a button to return home. But that's been the demo of Books R Us. Thank you for watching.
I'm here to show you the Books R Us infrastructure that we have created. So firstly, we contacted CCSIT and asked them for a VPN. They gave us access to their network, and so we have 2 servers running on Windows 2016. The first is the web server. The website is configured for IIS, and it can be reached at web550.ccsresearch.org. And once it loads, you'll be able to see our website. And while that is, we also have a database server that runs MySQL, and we connect to it through MySQL. Oh, there's our database, or our website. So we can view the library, we can search, we can go back to the home page and view it. So, and this is available to anyone on the CECS Research Network. Our database can be accessed through the MySQL client, through the MySQL Workbench, and as you can see, it is here. It's just, there's a query I wrote to show us everything that we're currently using. And then finally, I'd like to show the builds. So we can build master, and currently, unfortunately, it only checks Visual Studio unit tests and not the code coverage or the Angular unit tests. But I can queue a build, and then after this build finishes queuing, which I won't show you, I'll show you a finished build. So it prepares the job, it'll initialize the agent, it'll check out, it'll restore, it'll build, it'll test it, make sure all the tests pass. As you can see in this last build, we had 13 pass tests and none failure. It'll publish it, and then it'll publish the artifacts so then we can release them. And unfortunately, for some reason, IIS or ASP.NET Core has a hard time building on Ubuntu versions of the containers. So But I can create a release, say that I want the latest successful version, and just deploy it. We will see that it's currently deploying. So it will download it to the agent. It'll stop the IIS site. It will deploy it to the web folder, which you can access if you do web550.ccsresearch.org. And we'll drop it here and start the site again. And then if I refresh, we'll be able to see it. So that is the infrastructure. And in future steps, I hope to get the test to actually run on ng-test and so on and so forth. Thank you.
The test plan changed a little bit. We're just going to cover the main differences and successes that came from the original presentation about the test plan. The biggest change in the way the libraries we're using for testing is that we used Entity Framework for our integrations test as we changed from the .NET MVC to .NET Core. The Entity Framework just allowed easy faking of the database for controller tests. Our test plan, the big change here is in that bottom right corner, there used to be a whole acceptance branch that the engineers would check into. We discovered we just did not have the time or resources to make a whole nother branch, figure out deployment builds, and so on, to have some acceptance branch where the product manager could evaluate whether the feature should be checked into the master branch. So the engineers just took a feature branch, did what they needed to on there, and then merged it onto master where it could be reviewed in production. Everything else, though, the general framework for testing remained the same, except for, again, that change to entity on the integrations test. Our acceptance test met its goal. So we had a goal of an acceptance test for every feature, and that stayed. And you can run those by with ng E2E. That's the Angular's end-to-end testing is what we use for our acceptance. Still used Protractor, by the way. Our integrations test, we met our goal, which was a test for every CRUD operation that we had. And we also made some services that helped the controller test, mostly around ranking or maybe interpreting calls from the front end and deserializing them into the back end. So those service tests were tested as well. Those services were tested as well, and all that is done through .NET test command. In our unit test, we managed to test all of our behaviors, and perhaps one of the biggest refactorings we did was splitting our Angular into containers and presenters, and we tested all the logic on the containers. And for the presenters, there shouldn't be any logic in there. So it helped us as a code smell to know if we were writing many tests for a presentational component, we were probably needed to hoist those things into a container. And you can run all those with ng-test. Our test metrics were successfully achieved the way we thought they would be, which is all during test. And the downtime, though, was greater than 5%. So we wanted it less than 5%, but it was greater. And I think that's just generally because the architecture we made was hard to implement, and there was a lot of back and forth with the IT department on how to set everything up at first, and eventually, the builds would break as we would try to change it and remodel our whole app and things like that. So it was probably down 30 to 42%, and luckily we were still developing that architecture, so we think that was an acceptable amount since it wasn't live to any users. And our retrieval rate for hitting our page is still less than 3 seconds, which is great. Our system testing, user testing did change a lot. Frankly, we realized just pairing was almost never going to happen. It's so hard for the 6 of us as distance learners to sync all of our clocks together, So we just did our best to let the tests speak for themselves. And for that went well, but we really did not care about execution. Since we were just rushing to MVP, there was never enough time in feature development to go back and worry, like, is this executing the most efficient way possible? And it was also never enough of a burden that we were worried about it as an engineer team. We did some good refactoring, some I'll mention up briefly earlier, which was our Angular stuff changing to the containers in presentational section. That was a great refactoring that we did, as well as removing the books.rs.model that we had when we were in .NET MVC. It was kind of a leftover from our change into .NET Core. So we removed all that stuff and just ended up making one single repository instead of two repos. And then in terms of how we were implementing, you can see through the stories charts and the burndown charts. I mean, it just got better as we went along. So we were less concerned because the features were still the baseline for what we were doing. We just did our best to make that all work. One of the positive things were from the product manager's aspect, where there were no bugs. Everything worked as intended. And all the corrections we needed to make were mostly design related, like the look of things. And we would just fix those as the test went on instead of rejecting them, because we didn't really have time. Nobody was consistently engineering every day like a company. So it's not like we could just reject a story and somebody would get to it right away to go fix a thing. So we would just fix those minor details in line with the next feature that we developed. And the designer, for the usability stuff, the website was down sometimes, but we would just run it locally and make sure that it all worked, and that was good. Same with the usefulness. Whenever the designer would find anything that wasn't quite as useful as we thought, we'd just throw it into the next story instead of rejecting that story and doing it all over again. And one thing that we noted for improvements was a book description would help. Once we had the API from Google Books, there are so many books that we'd never even heard of. And we're like, man, I wonder what that book's about. I bet a user would want to know what that book's about too. So one day in the future, we'd love to see some book descriptions get included as an improvement to our app.